Hey everyone, Effie here. Today we're going to make a watercolored card using our new blooming hibiscus stamp set. We're going to do some watercoloring, so I'm going to use this watercolor paper. Generally, I cut this in 4s, but today I'm just going to white heat emboss my floral and leaf images directly onto the larger watercolor paper, and then I'm going to cut out those pieces and then die cut them. So before I do any heat embossing, I'm going to prep my watercolor paper with some of our anti-static powder, which comes in a little puff tool applicator. Once I've prepped my watercolor paper, I'm going to stamp the larger floral stamp and the leaf stamp with some Versamark embossing ink, and then I'm going to spoon on some white embossing powder and hit the whole panel with my heat gun. And this is what the embossed images look like. Next, I'm going to do some watercoloring with some Ken Oliver color burst. This is a palette that I created with the color burst. I will link to the video where I created this palette so you guys can see exactly how I made this. I'm doing some wet in wet watercoloring, which is a watercoloring technique. Basically, the paper is going to be wet when I apply my wet watercolor onto that area. I'm using alizarin crimson for my base color. I'm applying the paint onto the wet petal areas with a fine tip water brush, and then I'm blending that color out with a medium or large tip water brush. I'm going to apply this base color onto the entire floral, but I'm concentrating the color along the edges of the petals. I'm making sure that the centers of the petals have a little bit of lightness to them. I want to make sure that I have some really dark areas closer to the edges of the petals, and then as we get closer to the center lines of the petals, I want to make sure that those center line areas are a little bit lighter. If we have a nice light area and a nice dark area on each petal, and this is going to look more pleasing to the eye, it's going to have a little bit more impact. I'm layering on my alizarin crimson watercolor powders in different stages so that I can achieve the light and dark area. Next, I'm going to add some gamboge to the center of my hibiscus, and I'm using my fine tip water brush to add those flicks or streaks coming from the center of the hibiscus out to the edges of the petals, but don't bring the gamboge all the way to the edge of the petals. You want to stop about midway. Once I'm done with the center of my hibiscus, I'm just going to add a little bit more detail to the edges of my petals. If you've ever seen a hibiscus in real life or photos of a hibiscus, they have these beautiful detailed ripples in the petals, and I'm trying to achieve that look. We're not going to go too crazy by adding too many of those details, but anytime you see a curve along the edges of the petals, that's where you want to add a little bit more of the alizarin crimson and then just blend it out towards the center of the hibiscus, and this way we get a little bit of that beautiful detail. So I'm really excited to be back with our watercoloring videos. I haven't made a video like this in a while because I've just been focused on the layered stenciling, but we are still producing our beautiful floral stamps, and I want to showcase them as we watercolor. And my favorite watercolor powders or paints to use are the Ken Oliver color burst. I believe he has rebranded this product line and they're now called Color Sparks. I've never used the Color Sparks line before, but they seem like they're the same. I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that. I think that color bursts are still available on sites like Amazon, but if you have any other kind of watercolor powders, I say go for it. You can use any watercolor paints that you have. I am just partial to color bursts and they last forever, so I'm going to keep using them until I run out. Next, I added dots of wisteria to that center area of the hibiscus, and I added darker streaks of gamboge to the center of the hibiscus. Next, I'm going to watercolor the leaves. I added a base layer of lime green, and then I added some deeper concentrations of terre verte to the bottom and top edges of my leaves. I'm going to let all 3 images dry, and then I'm going to die cut the 3 images with the coordinating dies. The leaves, it's actually 1 die that'll cut out both leaves at once. And if you saw me stamp them earlier, it's one stamp that stamps out both leaves at once. So I just wanted to make it easier to stamp and die cut these smaller leaf images. Once I've die cut my watercolor pieces, I'm going to add some True Navy ink blending to a piece of blue cardstock. And I wanted the edges to be really dark, and then I wanted that center area to be a little bit lighter. Next, I'm going to add some white acrylic paint splatters to my background panel, and I'm just using a toothbrush, and not a toothbrush, a paintbrush, and some acrylic white paint, which I've diluted with a little bit of water. If you're not getting the paint splatters that you need, just experiment with the amount of moisture in the paint. And as you tap your brush, I tap the brush onto my palette knife closer to the brush or bristles. I find that when I tap the brush towards closer to my hand, I don't get as many splatters. So once I finish splattering on my white paint, I added some gold metallic paint splatters as well, and I used some Fine Tech watercolor paints. If you have Gansai Tambi metallic watercolors or any other metallic watercolors, they'll work as well. Next, I popped up my florals and the leaves, and then I white heat embossed this How Are You sentiment from the same Blooming Hibiscus stamp set. The sentiments in the stamp set also have coordinating dies, and this is what that looks like. Lastly, I added some of our black rhinestones. Before I end this video, I just want to encourage you to experiment and play with whatever you have in your stash to achieve similar results. You don't have to use the exact same paints or the exact same colors that I have. If you only have a purple color burst, try using that, or whatever you have in your stash. I just encourage you to take out your stamps and play. So if you haven't done so already, be sure to give this video a thumbs up and then subscribe to our YouTube channel, because I'll be back with more videos. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you next time.